Alright, so this week brings us another one of those very small, bare-bones thrillers from A24, which I was always interested to see what they were going to do, given that they're just fresh off a Best Picture winner with Moonlight. And what they seem to have given us is what is so far the best movie of the year, which is right in the middle of the year, so that about makes sense. And the thing here is that we kind of have, it's a couple of things we kind of feel like they ventured into a little bit. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of comparisons to The Witch, I imagine, where it's going to be very divisive with audiences, like mostly people who really appreciate art house movies as well as critics are probably going to love it, and kind of regular moviegoers probably are going to be kind of tricked into thinking they're going to see something else, and then when they see what it is, they're very, very disappointed and pretty much take only that away from it. But still, it does kind of have that same feel where it does feel like it'll probably be accused of, nothing happening or something like that, but there's actually quite a bit going on in this if you really want to look at it. I mean, there are times where maybe you might risk over-analysis, but if you really, really want to have fun with it, you can really kind of dig in and take almost anything you see and try to think, what could this possibly mean, or maybe this means something like this, to just kind of get an idea of what the characters are doing, because we get thrust right into the middle of what's going on with them at the very start, starting with this scene with the grandpa, and we kind of get the sense immediately that a big player in this movie, obviously, much like The Witch, the technical aspects are going to be a very driving factor in this, like the way the score is used, how it's not overabundant, but it does get big when it needs to. Like, I really love the way it really, really built in this opening scene. And then it's just kind of there, its presence is known, and it doesn't get big again until really the climax, but it pretty much works through the whole thing and really, really sets a mood. And kind of helps the audience a little bit. Like, it keeps the movie from being ambiguous to a fault. Like, it doesn't beat you over the head and say, this is what you need to feel, but it does really, it's a nice guide for the audience, the score is, which is what most good scores do, but some composers tend to lose sight of that. And so there's also, in a visual sense also, not just, the way kind of the outdoor scenes are shot, or like the dimly lit scenes, but there's also stuff kind of like the Red Door, where everything around it is pretty much just like wood and bland, but then you just have this really striking red kind of just, bright out at you, and then when the light hits it, like a lantern hits it, it almost looks wet, and it almost kind of gives you a feel of like fresh blood almost, or something very foreboding like that. Another A24 movie that kind of you get the same sense of is Into the Forest, where if you saw that, you'll remember. Here's a visual in case you didn't, because it didn't get near the press that a lot of A24's movies have, but it's also kind of that same setting where there's something that's been happening in like the big cities, and we're not really sure what exactly the issue is, and so we're just kind of in an isolated woods, and we're not really sure, who comes in and out of the story, whether or not they're trustworthy or dangerous. They could be both. And it really does kind of have that same feel as that. But this movie is much more, I guess, sinister and bleak, whereas Into the Forest is more about hope. And so the great thing here to really look at is the way these characters interact, and kind of trying to piece together what it might have been like before everything happened, and then kind of what happened right before when the movie started. And there are just things in there that you can look for, and it's kind of like maybe clues to how these characters are, and to kind of try to build around what we've missed. And there's stuff like just little things that may even be nothing, kind of like that first scene when they're having dinner after the grandpa is gone, and they all have their plates there, but when Joel Edgerton finishes, he asks his son, "Are you done?" and then he takes the plate away, and then he just takes Carmen Ejogo's plate away without asking her if she's done or not. And it's just one of those things where you can kind of try to really put together what kind of character Edgerton is before the movie goes on, and it's kind of like, it seemed more like it started off like oh, does he have like a lot of control over her or something, and then it more turns into he just kind of has an understanding to her. Like the reason he probably didn't ask was because he just knows that about her, whether she was or not, without having to ask. This is where I was talking about where you kind of risk over-analysis of tiny things, but sometimes it can really drive your interest in the story and really kind of make you attached to these characters when you're really trying to figure out where they stand and what their relationships are with each other. And that's where a very large aspect of the movie lies, because we spend pretty much all of our time with these characters in this one location, occasionally going outside. And then we are introduced to before that there's also the whole thing about we never really get to know the grandpa, because the first scene is them, you know, shooting him and setting him on fire. But pretty much throughout the movie, there's still a sense, even though we didn't know the grandpa at all, we still have this sense that a part of these people is missing now, and we get that. Like, we see, like, a picture with Travis and him together, and then there's, anytime Travis goes into his room, there's that bed now that the dog has taken, and we know that seeing that more or less empty bed, there's just a feel through it, like something has been taken from them, and there's like a hole in their family. And we can get that just with these kind of unspoken things that are just in there. But then we go forward, and Christopher Abbott's character comes into this, and we get to play with that. That's pretty much what the rest of the movie is playing with this whole trying to figure out who's trustworthy and who isn't thing. And this character, we're just kind of waiting. Like, at first, he seems untrustworthy because he shows up with a gun, but then he has a reasonable story, and we know he has a family. But you're still just... They're so mysterious, these people, is like, every time Abbott's doing something or saying something, you're just kind of waiting for him to contradict himself, to kind of maybe send us in a direction. But there's also... but the really interesting thing they do about that I really like here, is when you look at these two families... Obviously, we will see the protagonist as Joel Edgerton and his family, because that's where we started. And then Christopher Abbott's family kind of comes into this, almost like intruding. So it's almost like they're both sympathetic because they're both in this situation and they're both equally desperate. But since we feel like we know one family better than we know the other, there's kind of that you might take to one and assume the other is untrustworthy. But what I really like about the way this plays out is it's done in just enough of a way to where it feels like if the roles were switched, but nothing changed, that you could kind of flip-flop that, and how there's some cases where they both seem sympathetic, but then there's also cases where you feel like you could switch their roles and change nothing, and one would feel like the antagonist. Like, we could see everything from Christopher Abbott's perspective instead of Edgerton's, and with nothing changing, Edgerton's family could seem antagonistic if they were kept as mysterious as the other family is. And I liked how you can pretty much see it in all those different ways just by the way they connect. And one of the things that I think really makes this movie stand out in a big way, the performances are great. Riley Hugh especially has some really, really good scenes, some really haunting scenes, but Edgerton really, really makes this stand out in a way that I think hardly anything else in this movie does, because he's very much... Obviously, he's our driving force through this, but there's also kind of the way he has these different ways of approaching what he does, because at the start, it almost seems like it's going to be a thriller right away when he has Christopher Abbott tied to a tree. And we're not quite sure. We obviously eventually know why, but for a while there it's kind of like, what's he going to do to him, and, you know, what exactly is he capable of, because we don't really know this yet. We don't know hardly anything about him yet. And then, when he's not in a desperate situation, he's very normal, and he's very calm, and almost like warm and welcoming, when it's like... When he's saying, you know, I don't want to kill you, but I definitely will. My gun is loaded, as you can see, and I will do this. And we see, obviously, in the opening scene with the grandpa, he's obviously, whatever has led them to that exact moment, he's able to kill people now. Like, he can just, it's just in his mindset that if he has to, it can be done. And he's the kind of character where he will not really hesitate if he feels like there's a danger. He will just absolutely do what is necessary, and it makes him come off very threatening and very, like, you just kind of feel nervous around him because that there's such a, it could be paranoia, it could not be, that's driving him to just being able to make really drastic decisions very quickly. And so when we see him after it turns out that the family is probably okay, he suddenly, when all that dies down and all that kind of, you know, dread and pressure dies down, we see the normal person he probably once was, and how he's very, you know, friendly and joking with them when he's telling them the rules. Like, the rules, obviously, with a guy this intense, you would think he'd be very strict about the rules, but when he's telling them the rules, it's a very laid-back dinner scenario, and it's just like he's having any kind of normal conversation with them. It just happens to be, by the way, these are the life and death circumstances that this house is, the foundation of this house. So I really like that. But then there's kind of a, it's always unclear with him, because obviously he's very genuine in those scenes, but then we also have scenes where, like, when Abbott's chopping, you know, wood with Travis, Edgerton's son, and we kind of see this look on Edgerton's face that's almost like resentful, and we're not quite sure, we're able to kind of study what exactly his thought process could be, where it's like, maybe he's sad that, oh, this is the life, the normal life that Travis should have, but instead he lives in this world. Or it could be, why is that guy taking, you know, these moments with Travis away from me, and just kind of getting real resentful about it. It could be either one, and the way he kind of plays up all the number of things it could be with just using his expressions is extremely impressive. And then there's just the scenes where he flat out goes up to Travis and he says, you know, this is all well and good, but you need to keep it in perspective and trust no one. No matter how much we're all getting along, still trust no one. And he sticks to that through the whole movie. He's a character that you can never really confuse his motivations, but you can wonder occasionally what's going through his mind, because it could be one thing or another. But when it comes to his motivations, it's still very much a clear-cut character that we can really come to understand. And then there's also a lot of added tension in different ways, like when Kim and Travis meet in the kitchen when everybody else is asleep, and they kind of do like the dinner scene in Hook, where they're pretending that there's food there and pretending that there's, you know, magnificent desserts there. And it seems fine, even though he just had a bit of an erotic dream about her. But there's also the moment when she catches him, like, she leans back and she, like, catches him looking at her chest. And there's this tension there because, you know, the only woman that this kid has known for a while now is his own mother. And he can't really do anything about that. But then again, he's 17 years old, and he's at that stage in his life where this is, like, coming full force. And here comes this beautiful woman into his house, and there's gonna be that tension there when he's, like, listening in, where Travis almost kind of becomes the creepy character in this sense, where he's kind of always lurking around outside their room and kind of listening in. And of course that can become beneficial in the event that they aren't trustworthy, but, you know, he's a teenage kid. I think we know why he's listening into their bedroom, but so there's tensions like that come about as well, and really add to the characters as well. And these kind of interactions that you wouldn't really, that seem kind of small scale when it comes to what's going on in this world, but it just kind of somehow manages to add even more kind of attention, even if a different kind, into this whole setting, and just kind of layer the tension a little bit. And then there's another interesting talking point about this movie you may have noticed is the title. How the title seems to kind of set up that something big is going to happen in regards to what is out in the woods that we don't necessarily see. Because there is a moment where the dog gets loose and he's, like, barking at something, like he really, really senses something's out there, and he runs after it. And Edgerton, Abbott, and Travis are all out there, and they just kind of let the dog go, and Edgerton says, alright, well, just let the dog go, we're leaving. After the dog has stopped barking as if he's found something. And you may think, well, are they just gonna leave? But then there's also that thing where no matter how hardcore Edgerton comes off and how kind of fearless in this situation he seems to be, like he's the one that will go and do what's necessary. It's almost like you get a sense that he doesn't like us, kind of us as an audience. I mean, there's always that, you know, urge to wonder what it is, especially if we know we're never going to see it. But there's also a sense that I kind of got from Edgerton's character when he says, alright, leave the dog, we're going back to the house. It's almost like, even as hardcore as this guy is, I felt like he really didn't want to know what the dog saw and what the dog went after or what's out there. And I kind of felt that too. Like, I didn't figure we were gonna, because the movie, this is one of those movies where you can just kind of tell by looking at it, where it's gonna be one of those art house movies that is kind of like an anti-horror thing, where it like builds up and builds up, but then ultimately doesn't really show you what's going on or what kind of stuff is lurking out there. But I think that's kind of where the title comes in, where it's like, where it talks about the it that comes at night. That could potentially be, you know, like, just the paranoia in general that Edgerton's character has. But there's also kind of that thing where it's like, kind of like a fear in general, where you'll notice that, obviously, just in human nature in general, you're much more likely to get terrified in the middle of the night than during the day. And it could just literally be anything. It could be a noise in the dark, or it could be anything, and suddenly your imagination will make things come true. Like, if you see, like, something scary in a movie or something, and then that night, you're just, like, alone in the dark, and then you hear something, your mind makes you say, well, that thing I saw in that movie is real now, and it is here, and it's going to kill me. How the night is able to bring out fear like that, and able to really take over your mind and make things that seem unreal real to you. That could be what the title refers to. That's how that's probably how I'm gonna take it, though I'm sure there's like a billion interpretations. I don't know if the writer-director himself had one in mind, but, or if it's just supposed to be like a generally ambiguous thing, but I do really like, I think the title really works in that regard, even though I imagine it's another case where a lot of people point to the title and say, that's why I was disappointed in this movie, because it promised something that didn't come. But I do think this is definitely, to me anyway, this is definitely not a nothing happens movie. Really a lot happens in this movie. You just kind of have to really, I guess it helped that just knowing A24 as a company, I kind of figured what I was in for, something akin to The Witch or Into the Forest, or a combination of both, really. So I was kind of prepared for that. It's all just kind of, it's not necessarily about what exactly it is that's out there, it's just that it's out there. And that's what the scary thing is. On top of what's all going on with our characters here, and how anything that goes on here could potentially be more threatening than what's ever out there. It's really hard to say. Because desperation gets you to a place that's really, people become capable of anything. And I think that's what really makes this movie strong. It's just really, really building on that kind of thinking. There's also the thing about the dreams Travis is having. I'm not totally sure how I feel about those, but it's, I could see it in, like, for a movie that's getting so praised for not, you know, going to normal horror cliches, it does use the dream sequences for jump scenes, which I think is kind of cheap, especially for a movie that seems to feel it's above that, but I do also kind of see it in a sense of, like, kind of like a Mulholland Drive scenario, where you're kind of watching it, and after a while it can get to that point where it gets kind of so cerebral and the character dreams so much that after a while you have to wonder if what you're seeing is a dream or not. So I guess it kind of works in that regard, but as far as like just using it for cheap scares, not so much. But I do get the setup in general of using the dreams. And they might also have an important thing later on. Not just foreshadowing, but, well, yeah, kind of that, but maybe a little something else. And then there is one more thing. That's about what I wanted to say. So yes, it's very, very well done. It's very well shot. The writer-director here clearly had a sense of the movie he wanted to make and exactly how to go about that without kind of doing this whole, it's almost become a cliche in itself. Like, the whole thing was, the horror cliche was, there's like build up and there's like jump scares and stuff like that, and then eventually we're building to something, and then you'll notice this a lot in like Stephen King stories. When there finally is a payoff and when we finally do see something, 9 times out of 10 it's probably going to be a letdown. So then indie horror seems to kind of take in this approach of really going back to the Blair Witch Project, if not before. This whole idea of just not showing any the original The Haunting, where they don't even show you anything. And so it's all about just the fact that it is there. That's the terrifying thing, and how your imagination imagines what it would be like is obviously going to be probably a lot more horrifying than if you were to see it. Just as I was talking about with the fear in the dark thing, your imagination's like one of the scariest things there is, and this movie really toys with that in a really great way, while making some really strong characters, and using characters to really drive a pretty intense story. As I said, making what's probably the best movie of the year right now. However, there is one more thing I wanted to address before I end this, and that is, I know it's one thing, and I'm sure it's not a big deal to most people, but it just really, really rubbed me the wrong way, and that is, about a couple of days before the movie was released, A24 put out a tweet, and you know how distributors tend to tweet, hey, new movie's out, go have a look. The wording of this tweet was not good. It was the poster with Edgerton with the light on his face and the title, and the tweet was something along the lines of, if you're dreading the incoming shit pile that is all the franchises and reboots coming out this summer, see It Comes at Night. Like, see something more stimulating. And it was, oh god, that is, because here's the thing, is this way of thinking is really, there are a lot of reasons that art house movies have a bit of a stigma when it comes to regular movie-going audiences. And a big part of that stigma seems to come from people that see an art house movie and they really love it and are able to appreciate it and get much more out of it than, a franchise movie or a blockbuster movie or whatever. So those people, to build themselves up and to really, because they see an art house movie like It Comes at Night, for instance, and they get it, they feel like they have this intelligence that other people don't, against people that go see blockbusters or franchise movies or comic book movies or whatever. And so they basically belittle other audiences because they don't like the same movies, and to think that juvenile elitist bullshit is being encouraged by the studio is very, very disappointing. I really would have thought a studio like A24 was above that. So that just really rubbed me the wrong way. But apart from that, that's not to take away from the movie itself at all. The movie is outstanding. It is brilliantly done. The performances are brilliant. Everything is great. So that's just the thing. Is just you can love this movie, but don't necessarily think just because you love this movie that you can be an asshole too. That's what I'm trying to say. So I don't even remember what next week is. Funny enough, it might be Transformers. Just as I say this. But I don't remember. The schedule is so far off now. I was like a month off when I thought Spider-Man was coming out, but so yes, we have that, and then tomorrow you'll have the Versus that I did to kind of commemorate our loss of Adam West, and then the one I was talking about that is the teaming of a director and actor, one of which is one of my favorite movies, will be next week's Versus. So yeah, that's what we have for this week. So until then, that's it.